as much as possible. A normal 50 BMG cartridge rating, according to the file you're looking at, the rest of the page about it, as of 1994 standards, has a volumetric capacity in the cartridge that they assume is a little under 300 grains. The case mouth pressure maximum rating is 65,000 psi, and that's also what you should consider it at the chamber constriction down to the bore, and a little under 60,000 psi for the entire chamber. And 833 grain projectiles are listed as being acceptable depending on how much propellant. And it uses under 240 grains of propellant for all other projectiles except the ones we're going to be discussing today, which are a bit unusual. And of those, they get around a muzzle energy of around 1,500 foot-pounds on average, and you get 2-inch groups at about 100 yards. That's derivational. It's actually almost a foot at several hundred yards or whatever, but it works out to 2-inch groups at 100 yards if we were to just ballpark it. Now, that's about average, and that's what you see happening with the gun we're going to be talking about, and even with the cartridges we're talking about normally. Next, when it comes to Saboted Light Armor penetrators, SLAP rounds, whether it be the one on the left, which is an inert item that's just a tungsten pin that's 30 caliber, or the 30 caliber tracer version on the right, which comes out using a sabot that's half an inch. Doesn't matter which one, they work out as 350 to 360 grains of projectile weight. I'm generalizing it. And they use anywhere from 275 grains to 282 grains for these particular type of rounds. The SLAP rounds in general work in that range. Now remember, the grains of propellant normally used is 240 maximum. Now, the foot-pound rating and feet per second and all that kind of stuff are measured in this case at effective range of 80 feet. It's 55,000 psi for the chamber pressure. Velocity is 4,000 feet per second, 80 feet from the muzzle, all that sort of stuff. But the point I'm making here is the cartridges use a very light projectile and use more propellant and are kept within PSI rating of 55,000 psi. So we're talking about, the max chamber pressure tolerable for 50 BMGs in general being upwards of 60,000 psi. Now, in the case of SLAP rounds, it specifies machine gun caliber 50. Cartridge is to be used by soldiers equipped with M2 machine guns. Specifically, M2 machine guns have a barrel with an integral chamber or not. In this case, we're talking about that variety of gun and barrel combo. That's the most common. I'm not going to take apart a current issue M2 machine gun to see if they did something different. The cartridge has to be able to go into a machine gun, which means during firing process it has to self-eject by pressure alone. And it has to then use that energy partially to reload the next round in a machine gun. Okay, that's very important. Now we're talking again under 300 grains of propellant and 350 to 360 grain projectile versus upwards of 800 grain projectiles normally fired. Actually, they're much lower than that normally, and only 240 grains propellant maximum. Okay, so by definition, they're loaded hotter, but they're loaded with a lighter round. They're supposed to go fast, and the tungsten bit is supposed to hit something and punch a hole in it. And if you're curious, the inert rounds happen to have a color coding of amber, and the ones that have a tracer are red. Mark Serbu on the left and Royal Nunsuch on the right. Royal Nunsuch had done experiments up to the point of this video image you're seeing is a screen grab, making all sorts of guns out of random materials, mostly to see what limits they could reach. One of the methods for designing something is to make something out of weaker material and then slowly increase the pressures or performances until you get a break to simulate a much stronger material to find out where the weaknesses will be in your design. Once you get rid of the weaknesses or make it to where it doesn't really have any real weakness, you then make it in metal and then finally good grade metal, and you end up with something that is almost impossible to destroy if you do it right. That's one methodology for building it. Mark on the left, however, designs things using tried and true methods, and he's pretty much obsessed with his favorite thing, CNC-based machinery, so that he doesn't have to make any mistakes. Now, the design you're looking at is the RN-50. Named for Royal Nunsuch, who inspired it. It is a very simplified weapon. It is a barrel that has a chamber integrated in it for the cartridge, and then it has a screw-on cap with a floating firing pin. It's placed on it seems to be a reinforced version of an AR-15 lower, with metal bars here that are acting as positive locking mechanism to make sure you put the cap on correctly, because it screws on over the top of the back end of the cartridge. And then it's a brake action that falls back into it. And these ears, as he calls them, are there to make sure that the cartridge, to make sure that the gun is only going to close if you got the cap on tight. Most of the pressure is handled by the cap, but this also handles some of the pressure. And it has a custom-made hammer, these side plates, that sort of thing. And the rest of it can be a buffer tube or whatever for a stock you can put on for a kit. But the main thing is this entire gun is really just based on this part here. And if Mark Serbu puts out a much stronger barrel, it's going to have usually a muzzle brake, almost always, milled and put into it. And obviously, if he's going to make it to where it can handle a slap round, that's going to be a muzzle brake for a slap round. Anyway, this is based on using a machine gun cartridge in a single-shot break action rifle. It uses a custom hammer inside of an AR-15 lower, among other parts, a spring-loaded firing pin in a simple screw-on cap placed over the breech, and it uses a 1 in 15 button-rifled standard barrel, but it's an alloyed steel barrel with a chamber that is between match grade and standard. Certain rounds cannot fit into it. And you get groups, I've found a dozen quotes, but the groups work out less than 2 inches at 140 meters. The site suggests test firing it with a 660 grain full metal jacket 50 BMG M33 ball ammo from American Marksman that has a boxer primer if you care, and it uses annealed Lake City 2019 era brass, and it gets 2,600 feet per second, or 2,700 feet per second. And that's pretty average, and you notice how heavy that is. And yet it's still using probably less than 240 grains of propellant, because you don't want to overload something that's pushing something heavy with the wrong propellant or too much of it. Hint, hint. And yes, they're supposed to get 2-inch groups at 140 meters. November 25th of last year, 2020, Kentucky Ballistics, who had already bought and owned a standard barrel version of the RN-50 using the above specs, now got a hold of a 20-pound, 40-inch upper, 36-inch heavy barrel that had a larger machine gun type chamber. Again, it's made for that. And standard ammunition now extracted with less effort because it was slightly oversized for the other ammo. It still had the groups that were just as accurate as specified. He didn't see any differences other than he was able to get the cartridges out easier, and it was a better gun. And he also said he placed the order for getting the lower receiver and talked to Mark Serbu, specifically because he had 5 slap rounds he'd collected over the years, and now they cost $100. He wanted to use them before they went bad on their own. And these things are 1985, 1990s era. He then fired 2 of the slap shots. Both went through over a foot of cement. He recovered the projectiles, the tungsten pieces, and now had 3 left. Both of them hit consistently in the wrong position compared to all the other ammo he had, about 6 inches, and it was to the right. It may have been dropping to the right or not, but I only saw on the video 6 inches or less, or actually more than 6 inches. Now, March 17th, 2021, he used 1 slap round out of the 3 he had left on a Thor's Hammer video. He commented, "I only have 2 rounds left. What should I do next?" March 30th, 2021, he showed 4 slaps in a thumbnail for a video, and he said he had more that he'd gotten that were new. He fired 1 through the body armor plates, and he specified it was one of the old ones, so he still had 1 old slap round left, and now had a few more or many more of these cartridges. Now remember, these cartridges are $100 a pop. And there's a strong impetus for people to reload ordinary 50 BMG cartridges with the components and sell them at $100 a pop, because you can buy these at $3 or $4 a pop and just stick in the sabot. You could just do that, right? Foreshadowing. So anyway, April 9th, 2020, while shooting a steel hydrant, the first slap that may or may not have been one of the old ones, the only one left, or the new ones, did not pull right like the others. It actually hit dead on. Okay. The second one was low and to the right with a larger muzzle flash. This showed inconsistency in the ammo. Now either A, one of those shots was the ones that kept hitting to the right 6 inches or more, Or B, this is from the new pile of ammo. He doesn't specify it, I don't think. And more importantly, it's inconsistent. The third was a normal shot that he fired, and it had a normal straight hit and did nothing unusual and hit exactly where he was aiming, instead of moving off by over 6 inches. Now, I'm very suspicious that he was doing that to make absolutely sure the gun was working correctly. If there was anything wrong with the gun at that point, number one, it wouldn't have fired correctly. Number two, it wouldn't have hit perfectly. And most importantly, if there was a bore obstruction or any debris, it's gone now. Because the cartridge he fired on the third shot would have cleared the bore of anything and had nothing to leave behind. Unless it was some catastrophic failure, again, that would have caused it to hit wrong. Now remember, the muzzle brake was designed with the barrel, and the barrel is the barrel that was provided by Serbu Arms, knowing he was going to fire SLAP rounds. The SLAP round is a 30 caliber tungsten projectile in a 50 caliber Cytec polymer sabot. But people could just make fake versions and reload an ordinary cartridge and sell them for 30 times what they cost. This was first made in 1985, finalized as a design that was accepted by the U.S. Marine Corps in the 1990s and used in Desert Storm and such. There are two other cartridges that are like this. One of them is a Chinese version, and the other one was the 7.62 experiment by NATO, or NATO version. This variant caused catastrophic bail failures only in the M60 due to the sabot breaking up in the bore and a penetrator hitting barrels and puncturing them inside. That is not what happened with the 50 BMG version of this. And the failure of the gun happened right here. The post-mortem done by the designer and by him both agree that these pieces here were sheared off. This screw-on cap blew backwards and broke it off clean. And this barrel went up, and this part here shot straight down, very importantly, broke a finger. And pieces of the ears ended up going past his head. One went in his neck and ended up in his lung. And the cap hit him in the face and broke his eye socket. And if you're not aware of it, that red sabot, that's actually what he was firing, not the amber ones apparently, but it could have been the amber. It doesn't matter which one. Let's continue. The fourth and last round was the SLAP round that destroyed his gun and almost killed him. Now I'm going to show you this, but till this happened, the Wikipedia page on SLAP rounds were ignored for 2 years. It's a boring subject. It's well understood, but suddenly it had warning labels on it. SLAP ammunition is completely inoperable in M2 machine guns if they have the Stellite liner. Okay, most, I don't know, okay, fine. And also, should not be used in firearms with muzzle brakes unless the muzzle brake has been specifically designed for use as such. And obviously that's the case. Someone showed up basically putting in warning labels because of this incident. And almost to prove the above wiki page entries were totally legit, a new wiki page was generated or birthed out called Unsafe Firearm and Cartridge Combinations to back it up, with nobody contesting it. A few things about this single frame of video. This is a YouTube video. It has anomalies in it, number one. Number two, the compression algorithm on YouTube squeezed together 3 or 4 frames here. It's not an accurate depiction. Okay? That is the sight, telescopic sight, and that's how much it's moved. It's only moved from here to here. Now we're going to look here and see how far that moved. It moved from here to here. That's consistent. And there's the muzzle. We can't see it. Now we're going to look at his head. He's blown back only that far because only the cap hit him along with some of the parts. But the entire lower receiver of the gun goes from here straight into the table. It's blown backwards, mostly because his arm bent down, and he probably hit the end of his finger with the front hinge of it. Now we're going to look at how much movement we get in a few frames here. Now where is it pirouetting from? We're going to point this here, and we're going to go forward. You can see that it is very consistently rotating with an axis that matches its spinning like this is the pivot point. What that means is that it blew up exclusively at the breech and threw this up against this, because this hit this and pushed it down. That caused the rotational force. There is no sign that this blew up in the barrel, even though the flashover effect is painted over the top of this. Not sure how that happened. I'm sure we'll find out later. It may have been one old SLAP round that did this, or the new ones. I'm deciding it has to be the new ones. I can't blame